improved to 1-1 on the season with a 35-0 blowout defeat of the Miami Dolphins. We got a lot to cover today. This is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the show. Every time we go live, before and after a game, you will get a notification. I'm going to bring Ryan Talbot into the show right now. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but let's start with your first takeaway here. I mean, we got a ton of things to get into. I was talking to some people in the press box during the game. I was like, there's so much that happened. Even in the first half, it really made this game kind of drag on as we got into the second half, but a lot to break down. What was your main takeaway here?
Main takeaway is this defense looks legit for the second straight week. Run defense, pass defense, you name it. This looks like one of those top 5, top 3 units in the NFL through 2 weeks.
Definitely. We're going to get a lot into this defense. We're going to talk about what's going on with this offense. I'm going to probably go on a little bit of a rant here, dealing with some comments today. I was trying to tweet some perspective, and we'll get into that in a minute. But this is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets, your neighborhood store with more. We're letting everybody get into the room here so you can join in. You can comment. Sarah Holland she'll be joining us later on in the show. She's going to be in the comment section as well. If you got a thought, if you got a question, if you got a comment on the game, make sure to comment that on Facebook, YouTube, or even on Twitter, and she'll aggregate that into the show, and we'll bring her on later today. Whether you're celebrating at home or away, Tops has all your fan favorites ready to enjoy for football, entertaining, or any occasion. Head over to Tops Friendly Markets, your neighborhood store with more. All right, let's start off with Ryan. I can't remember now. This is my 4th year covering the team, but even going back thinking, to teams of the past for the Bills, I can't remember a game where it was such a one-sided affair, really on both sides of the ball throughout, where there was so much angst from the fan base. It seemed like on social media, the Bills go up 14-0 early on. Their defense is really playing well. I know that the offense had a few hiccups. There were some drives that weren't, the execution wasn't really where you probably want it to be, but overall, and all things considered, where this team was a week ago in a disappointing loss against Pittsburgh, I thought that they played pretty well, but it seemed like nothing really was good enough until the end for Bills fans, for some Bills fans.
Yeah, and listen, I know you're going to go on a rant here, and maybe the rant's going to be against me as well. I kind of understand where they're coming from. After 2 great drives to start the game, the Bills go up 14-0. It looks like all is well on the offense. Defense is playing lights out. But then for the rest of that first half, the offense just was not on the same page. Josh Allen was missing throws. The interception that he threw was behind Stephon Diggs. He had throws throughout this game that he's going to go back and say, boy, I probably have a touchdown if I put a little more air under a ball to Stephon Diggs, and there's one, but it's underthrown. There's 3 or 4 balls that I think could have been intercepted. Now, do the Dolphins have an outstanding secondary? Yeah, it's probably the strength of this team. But at the same time, Josh Allen's dominated against this Miami Dolphins team throughout his career, and it just wasn't a great performance by Allen for the second straight week. Just completed over 50% of his passes, so I get to a certain extent while there is why there is some angst, but at the same time, the Bills did win 35-0.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think that this one thing that it gets lost. I think even as much as Sean McDermott and some coaches around the NFL kind of spew it out there, is the nature of this league. It's unlike any other league. If you're a baseball fan or a basketball fan, a lot of times really good teams establish themselves with the way that they build their rosters. And those good teams tend to be the teams year in and year out. But what we see year in and year out in the NFL is great teams fall off. I mean, you go into a year and you expect certain things. I mean, even dial it back a year. Going into last year, I know Tom Brady was out of the mix, but there were still a lot of experts expecting the New England Patriots to run the AFC East. And I think that what happened last year, right? 16 game sample size. Teams are going to adjust to that. Teams are going to game plan for that Bills offense. We've seen things work against this Bills offense now. So it's not always going to be, high level production from this offense. Now, with that said, I'm not talking about what you're saying, like the level of concern for what we've seen from this Bills offense. That's perfectly fine. I'm talking about the irrational overreactions. The Bills should have never given Josh Allen a contract. Get Brian Dable out of here. And I know that's I think a lot of people don't deal in that crowd, and so they're not actively communicating with those people. But it's out there, and you're seeing it spewed quite a bit. And I just think that that's a gross overreaction to what we've seen so far. I think this is an offense, Josh Allen said it today, that's still trying to figure out what it likes, what plays it likes with the way that teams have adjusted to playing them. We're seeing it. Two things went into the first two games of the season. Number one, they're playing really good defenses with really elite secondaries. I'm pretty sure, I got to go back and look at it, Byron Jones got hurt in that first game in Miami last year. Well, guess what? He wasn't hurt today. He was making big-time plays, making it hard in the secondary. Stephon Diggs versus Xavier Howard, worth the price of admission. We're going to talk about that later in the show. This was just a game where this offense, it's still kind of figuring it out. But while they're figuring it out, there's so many good things to take away from this game. I think that Bills fans should be in a more celebratory mood, but I understand the concern. And concern is okay. I just think the overreactions is where I wanted to rant on a little bit.
No, and that's more than fair. Listen, I think Bills fans came in with some Super Bowl expectations this year. You drop week one matchup to a Pittsburgh Steelers team that dropped a game this week to the Las Vegas Raiders. And you're wondering, how good is this team? But you're right. It's been two elite defenses. The Bills are going to get another one here soon, at least some key players on that Washington defense. Chase Young, that looks like he's going to be one of the best in the league here soon. But the secondary there in Washington we're letting a lot of guys go open this past Thursday night. So maybe this week 3 matchup at home will be a get right game for Josh Allen for this passing attack where they look like they're more on the same page for all 4 quarters.
Definitely. And let's, start to really unpack this game a little bit here, Ryan. If you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you. Welcome into the show, Shout Buffalo Bills Football Podcast. I'm live from Miami Gardens inside Hard Rock Stadium. If the connection's not great, we try to do what we can, find a place to do the show. It's always a fun little post-game activity once we finish writing is trying to find a spot. I think I'm in an actual suite right now. Hopefully they don't kick me out. But we're going to get into this game, unpack it all for you guys. And I want to start on the defensive side of the ball because last week I felt like, a lot of the talk was around how the defensive line came out, played pretty well at the start. And a lot of people felt that pass rush faded in the second half. There was no fading today, Ryan. 6 sacks for this defensive front. Leslie Frazier was aggressive. He was blitzing. Let's start with the young pass rushers. Gregory Rousseau, in his return to Miami, Florida, 2 sacks today. But honestly, I'd argue that the more impressive performance, and maybe it doesn't show up on the stat sheet as much, AJ Epinesa, 2 quarterback hits, knocking Tua Tagovailoa out of the game in the first quarter on the 3rd series of the game. 3 sacks in the first 2 series. It was an unbelievable performance by this front. And I think AJ Epinesa today, he kind of announced his arrival as a pass rusher to watch now here in his second season.
Yeah, I agree completely. Listen, last week the Bills went against a Pittsburgh Steelers team that had Ben Roethlisberger, who got the ball out of his hand quicker than any quarterback in the NFL. We said going into this game, Tua's going to hold the ball a little bit longer, and sure enough, he did. The Bills come out, they're aggressive. Taron Johnson gets an opening sack, but throughout the 4 quarters, whether it was Tua back there, whether it was Jacoby Brissett, it felt like AJ Epinesa was all over the place. He was coming in, getting pressures, getting those really close would-be sacks where he's on someone's back and then they kind of wiggle away, but it turns into a sack for someone else. So, you're right. Epinesa, it's one of those deceiving stat lines when you look at it. You'd be like, oh, boy, it really felt like he was making play after play. But when you look at his stat line, it's not there. It's kind of like what we've said about Star Lotulelei for over the years. You don't see it in the stat line. Epinesa was everywhere. He was getting other guys on this defensive line sacks. He was making life miserable for the quarterbacks. He obviously knocked Tua out of the game in the first quarter, like you mentioned, but he also caused an errant throw on that play that caused a turnover on down. So he did a lot of things that, like you said, doesn't show up in the stat sheet, but he was unbelievable. Greg Rousseau, 2 sacks in his return to Miami. A nice, really good feel-good story for the kid. And listen, this is what we've been talking about all offseason, Matt. It's why the Bills invested so much in their defensive end position. You have Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, both players who performed well in their own regard, but they're in the final year of their contract. And you want these young guys to step up and play well. And both of them here in week 2 showed you a glimpse of what this Bills pass rush might look like in heavy doses starting in 2022.
Yeah, I thought that Greg Rousseau is such an interesting case study here because this is a guy that I feel like a couple months ago, as we were talking about like the draft experts and what they really believe that he can be at this level. One of the things that I kept reading in scouting reports was that he tends to win. He almost kinds of runs himself into sacks with the way that he kind of hangs around a play. He's kind of a really sneaky player in the way that he kind of, lulls you to sleep sometimes. I feel like he's the perfect fit for what they try to do. Eric Washington always harps on rushing as a 4-man unified front. There's got to be, great understanding amongst members of the line so that they know, listen, I'm going to do this. You need to do that. And we have to work off of each other. And I feel like if you don't have a solid, feel for the game and what they want you to do, it's harder to execute that. I think that Gregory Rousseau, not only in the as a pass rusher, but his ability at the line of scrimmage as in run defense has really stood out to me as well. He's got long arms. He makes tackles. When he does hit somebody, if he does get his hands on somebody, he usually doesn't let him go. And that's such a valuable trait. And I think it's why they trust him so much so early.
Yeah, absolutely. He was great in run defense today. He probably could have had 3 or 4 sacks when all is said and done. There was one where he just missed Brissett, where Brissett kind of jumped out of the would-be sack. So it wasn't just him kind of like falling into sacks today by any means, but yeah, there was some help on a few of them where pressure kind of forced him that way. So he looked great. Epineza looked great. You have to feel really good about these young pass rushers. You saw Jerry Hughes get pressure. Mario Addison early in the game showed some really good bursts, closing in on Tua on a play where he was rolling backwards. So again, this is what the Bills really needed to do to close the gap and to kind of complete this defense. We need to upgrade the pass rushes was their philosophy. They did it in the draft. They did it in free agency, although one of the draft picks, Boogie Basham, was inactive. F.A. Obata inactive via free agency, a signing who suffered an injury late in the week. But they still got it done with the players that they had. So definitely a very promising sign for this young pass rush.
Mm-hmm. I was seeing some comments pregame. You put out this inactive stories. Harrison Phillips, a healthy scratch today, which I think surprised some people. But I think, I think that they're at a place right now where they have a lot of trust for Vernon Butler. Going back to Carolina, Eric Washington has it as a 2-phase player, like, what he's able to do as a pass rusher, but also what he's able to do when they need to move him around, ask him to do different things. He's been Star Latulelei's understudy before. And so I think that it's easy for them to kind of fall back into that. And Harrison was just it was a numbers game today. I think they like what Justin Zimmer brings as a pass rusher. We saw it out there today. He had the sack in the game. And I think that's going to be something to watch moving forward. Harrison Phillips is going to, I thought he played well last week in the first half, but maybe some of what we saw in the second half was the Bills feeling like, they needed more from that interior group. I thought Star Lotulelei, who we're going to talk about in a little while, I don't want to get too much into him yet because we got him moved down on the outline there. I want to talk about him specifically, but I thought that defensive front, Ed Oliver, continues to play pretty well. It's really just across the line and going back into the defensive backfield, the Bills are playing at a high level defensively.
Oh, without a doubt. And like you said, Harrison Phillips this week was the odd man out, just like Zach Moss was 1 week ago at the running back position. It's a numbers game. They have talent and depth at these positions, like defensive tackle, like running back. And you mentioned it. Justin Zimmer had a sack today. He ended up getting penalized for roughing the passer or unnecessary roughness, which I didn't agree with. But he was a disruptive force as well. He made some plays, so he made the most of his opportunity. They liked Vernon Butler for a reason in there instead of Harrison Phillips. So there's a rhyme or reason for the moves that they make here. It's just that some of these players are going to have to be patient and realize that unless there's an injury or on a given week what's happening, you have to kind of wait your turn, so to speak.
So there's so many question here from Mark Robbins. Do you think that Obata being out made Butler more important than Phillips? I don't know. I honestly think that Phillips, Ryan, you can chime in on this. I think that Phillips, Butler, Zimmer, they kind of all fall into the same bucket. I think that at times we've seen him in Phillips' career, he's been just as good in that 3-tech role as he has in that 1-tech role. So I think it's more about the trust factor that they have in Butler. And I think it just comes down to what they want. This is a situation out here today. I'm telling you right now, Ryan, it was sweltering today. I did 30 minutes on the pregame show, and I couldn't wait to get up to the press box, get the polo shirt on, get the dress flower shirt on. I had to step up my game. We're in Miami after all. And, but it was hot out there today. And I think that Phillips, is a guy, he put on a ton of weight this offseason, and they just wanted to be, I think, a little bit leaner, a little bit quicker. And I think Justin Zimmer gives him that.
Oh, without a doubt. And he brings a little bit more athleticism to the unit. Yeah. The Bills obviously went into this game saying you had to have drink so much water, take so much Pedialyte, stay hydrated. And those bigger players like Harrison Phillips, they're more likely to get cramped up to play limited snaps. So I'm sure that did play a role into it. And I saw that you were mentioning how hot it was, Tim Graham, on the pregame show. A lot of the media members were commenting on just how hot it was out there today. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense this week with the decision that they made. On a week-by-week basis, though, someone else could be the person that's inactive, whether it's Zimmer, whether it's Vernon Butler, who did jump offside at one point today for Buffalo's defense. You just never know. They're going to go in game by game, look at the matchups, and go with who they think is the better matchup on a position-by-position basis.
All right, so I had an idea that we can kind of rank maybe our top 3 or 4 defensive performers today because the defense was so good. There's so much love to kind of spread around there with these performances. So I'll start with you, Ryan. Who did you have as your number 1 ranked Buffalo Bills performer today on that defense?
Yeah, I think we were on the same page here. I went with Taron Johnson. I referred to him almost as the defensive MVP of the game. A few passes defensed. He would have blown up one of the fourth down plays had the ball been caught. He was there. He had the sack early in the game to kind of set the tone. Big matchup. Listen, Jalen Waddle made some plays for the Dolphins today, and a lot of that was out of the slot. But I thought Taron Johnson had an unbelievable game. He showed up in run support. He showed up getting after the quarterback, and he made multiple plays in terms of pass defense as well.
So I'm right there with you with Taron Johnson. I got into the post-game press conference, and Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde were the first ones up. And, about halfway through, I went to go ask him a question about Taron because he jumped off today, right? I mean, 2 tackles for a loss, the forced fumble. I mean, the hit stick was just unbelievable on this guy today. And so I said, Taron Johnson. And before I could even get the question out, Poyer goes, he just cuts me off. And he's like, Taron's a dog. That dude is a dog. It got real serious real quick. Micah Hyde chimed in. He said, he's the best nickel in the league. And I was like, oh, that's pretty crazy. I mean, I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to set it up. I didn't have to ask a question. They're ready to go. And I'm going to read you the rest of what Jordan Poyer said. He said, pound for pound, just the best nickel in the league. This dude just comes to work every single day, just believing that he's the best. He went out there. To me, it was amazing watching him play today. You don't even got to finish the sentence. The question, just the way he played today was incredible. Incredible. When you got 2 guys in Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde who've been around the block a few times in this league. They've seen a lot of things. There's not a lot of things at this stage that really stand out and impress them, can get them to talk about it like that. I've asked them maybe 100 questions over the last 4 years and haven't gotten that kind of passion behind a response. This is a guy, to me, Ryan, that's taking that next step. We talked going into the season. Who's that? I get asked this on radio shows all the time. Going into the season, who's going to be the guy on that defense that takes the next step? And I talk about Tremaine Edmonds. I talk about Ed Oliver. Maybe we missed the boat. Maybe it's Taron Johnson turning into an elite superstar nickelback who literally went through the ups and downs last season, getting benched during the regular season, coming back, having a huge pick 6 against Pittsburgh, then again in the playoffs, the iconic pick six against the Baltimore Ravens. And then what happened in that Kansas City Chiefs game? Another downer. That defensive secondary was absolutely beat up in that game. The way that Kansas City's offense was able to make plays, the way that he's responded, the way that he's come out and put 2 performances on tape back-to-back like this, Taron Johnson, man, this is superstar quality play from their nickel cornerback.
Yeah, he got off to a slow start last year. He has hit some struggles. He got benched, like you mentioned. Then in the second half of the season, he was pretty good, pretty solid. Made some game-changing plays in the regular season, obviously in the playoffs, and he's kind of picked up from that second half of the season performance. So for whatever reasons, maybe it's just really knowing the ins and outs of this defense. He's been here for quite a few years now, having confidence in his game, knowing that the help that's behind him, just maybe feeling like at this point he really is the best nickel in the game. Whatever the reason is, he was all over the field today. He made a ton of plays. He's doing it at the right time as he's in a contract year as well. So whether it's in Buffalo or elsewhere, he's putting out some great game tape here through 2 weeks.
All right, so I'll give my number 2 and my number 3, and then I'll turn it over to you to get to yours. I thought that number 2 to me, I really wanted to go with one of the pass rushers. But you know who was so good today that it's really hard to ignore how good he's been so far this year? Matt Milano, man. He, again, came out today. Leslie Frazier, we mentioned at the top of the show, very aggressive approach, blitzing both linebackers, all of his cornerbacks and his safeties. I think Micah Hyde had a sack. Taryn had a sack. I think Levi Wallace might have been on one. I can't remember. But Milano, like just his quickness to the ball, dealing with an ankle injury this week. He sat out on Tuesday. He came back today, had an outstanding performance, was a big reason why this Bills defense was able to do what it did today. And, looking at the stats right now, 5 tackles, a sack, 2 quarterback hits, 2 tackles for a loss. He recovered the big-time fumble caused by Taron Johnson. Matt Milano earning every penny of that $11 million he's making this year.
Yeah, and listen, it's funny. We talked on Wednesday how there were some eye rolls from the fan base with the ankle injury, dealing with this, that, and the other. Well, he didn't look like he was dealing with anything today. He was all over the field. He was being used as the blitzer. He was great in run support, great in coverage. You name it, this guy did it. And like you said, earning every penny of this new deal. The Bills knew how important he was to this defense. And listen, linebackers in today's NFL, you don't want to go overpaying them. He took a little bit of a discount to return to the Bills because he knew that this team was on the cusp of something special last year. And so far through 2 weeks, he's looking like the real deal. He's benefiting from the play up front, the play in the secondary. But Buffalo's linebacking core, I think, has looked really good through 2 weeks as well, even without Tremaine Edmonds on the field for much of the second half of this game due to cramping.
From hot-to-go pizza and appetizers, signature fried chicken, baby back ribs and subs, to delicious salads, brownie trays, Tops has everything you need to feed the hungriest fan. Head over to Tops today. Get yourself set up. If you're having any party, watching some Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, get after it. Head over to Tops Friendly Markets. All right, Ryan, let's get to number 3. Did you say who your third one was?
Number 3 for me is AJ Epineza. I know he didn't show up in the stat line, but the pressures were there. The quarterback hits were there. His play benefited the Bills in terms of other players getting sacks. Obviously, a turnover on downs on that hit on Tua that knocked him out of the game. So he did a lot of really good things after kind of, I don't want to say he was invisible in week 1 against the Steelers, but he didn't have as many opportunities because of how quickly that ball was getting out. He really showed today at that lower weight how much of a difference maker he can be using his speed and power.
Well, I had Epineza as well, and then if I had to go with a fourth, I probably would have gone Greg Rousseau. But for the interest of someone else, let's give it to Dane Action Jackson, Elliot Eisler. I'm going to give him I'm going to let him and Levi Wallace here. I thought Levi Wallace, responded again like he usually does, comes out in the first quarter, sets the tone, big pass breakup, gets the penalty, the taunting penalties, man. The NFL, the no fun league is at it again. Really responds a couple plays later. It might have even been the next play. I can't remember now. Interception off of Jacoby Brissett. Huge play in the game. The Dolphins are driving into Bills territory. They score a touchdown there. Who knows what the game turns into with the way that the offense struggled the rest of the half there. So huge play by Levi Wallace. But again, Dane Jackson, he's like that, I don't want to call him a closer, but he's like that elite bullpen ace that a lot of teams have, good teams have in baseball. And I hate to use the baseball reference because in the post-game press conference, Thad Brown tried to use one with Sean McDermott. And he said, I don't know. I'm not a baseball guy. I guess, Thad set it up like, Brandon Beane said that, you want to maintain your fastball. And that's why you signed Emmanuel Sanders. Well, did you show today with the way that you ran the ball that you got some off-speed stuff? And Sean looked like he was seeing like 3 heads. He was like, I'm not really a baseball guy. And so I appreciate the not getting the reference. So I apologize for that. But, Dane Jackson comes in cold off the bench, plays a really good football game, 3 quarters that he put in, helped this defense on the back end, and then made an absolutely huge play on a 4th down and 2. Justin Zimmer caused some chaos in the middle. He comes up from the side, makes the tackle to stop the ball carrier. Bills get the ball back, force a turnover. Dane Jackson today reminded everybody of the guy that we saw last year after a pretty, I don't want to say disappointing, but, a training camp preseason where he wasn't able to do enough to even, place himself in the competition to win that job. He comes out today and shows why the Bills view him as so valuable.
Yeah, listen, Dane Jackson was just kind of ho-hum this summer. He was there. He did a few nice things, but nothing that ever really jumped off the page. But he's just one of those guys that when he gets called into action, when his number is called, he makes a play. And not only did he stop that 4th and 2 run, he was the last man between the end zone for that play. So one, he made the stop, obviously, to cause the turnover on downs, but had they even picked up or gone by him, that would have been a 7-point score for the Dolphins. It would have really kind of closed the gap on the game there. So huge play by Dane Jackson. Going back to Levi Wallace, the starting number 2 cornerback for this game, makes a huge stop on 2nd and long, talks a little bit, draws the flag. And listen, I get it if you're a Bills fan and you're frustrated by it, but the NFL has come out and said, we're really going to cut down on it this year. We're going to call it taunting when we see it. I don't agree with it necessarily. I mean, this is an emotional game. Players have every right to kind of be emotional in that regard, but he drew the flag, and then a few plays later, he showed that savviness where he peeled off of his guy because he watched the quarterback, and he saw the throw going to Gesicki, cut off his guy, jumps the route, gets that interception. Just one of those smart plays that you knew the talent's there for Levi. You know that he can make some plays. But that was just one of those plays that kind of remind me of something that Tre'Davious White has done in years past, where he peels off his guy, jumps the route. That's exactly what Levi did early in the game to kind of redeem himself just a few plays after he had that penalty called on him.
Mm-hmm. If you're watching on YouTube, joining us a little late, we're going to probably go live around 7 o'clock on most game days. We just have a lot of stuff that we're kind of doing after the game wraps up. We do the press conferences, and I want to bring you guys what happened in the press conferences, what we were able to, talk to the players about and discuss it on the show. And I think, this was an intriguing Charles G on YouTube. Thanks for the comment here. We're going to talk about Josh now. This was a day that I think you want to get in there and talk to Josh Allen about what happened today. This was a game where the Bills had, again, for the 2nd straight week, over 300 yards of offense. Now, the difference this week in what Sean McDermott pointed out during the week, this isn't a yards-based league. This is a points-based league. Points win games. Today, they scored 35 of them. 3 of their 4 drives in the second half ended in touchdowns. They leaned on their running game today, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But just concerning Josh, let's break down his game a little bit. I think one of the big problems that he's dealing with right now is teams figuring out that he's got some issues up front. I mean, the Bills are struggling to block at the point of attack right now. I think Deion Dawkins played a better game, but he'd even tell you, and he did that in the post-game press conference, he's got a ways to go. Thought John Feliciano really was a lot better today. And but on the other side, Darrell Williams still, Ryan, there was a couple plays. I think there was one sack where Darrell Williams just got absolutely beat with a speed move to the outside. That can't happen. So there's a bit of Josh Allen, I think, being unsettled. You add in the factor of, crowds being back. And I think that I don't know how much of a role that plays, but I think it's definitely something. And then I just don't think that they're necessarily in tune yet. Josh talked in the postgame about, 2 things. Number one, they installed a lot of plays yesterday, which I think fans kind of saw me tweet that out and were like, wait a second, like, why are they installing plans? Well, I had a couple conversations, with some people that I, trust, former players. That happens all the way up until game day. A lot of times, sometimes in the game, they add plays in and they adjust. I mean, that's why, we talked about it during the week. Emmanuel Sanders in his playbook, 34-year-old Super Bowl winner, a game into the season, he's still deep into his playbook, making sure he knows everything that they have in that installed in there. So they're ready to pull from it when they find a matchup that they want to exploit. And so I think it comes down to this offense as a whole. Brian Dable still trying to get a feel for how he wants to unleash this blueprint. And there's just not enough. There's not enough execution is one thing, but I just don't think that they seem 100% solidified as a group, all the groups, coaching staffs to players, in the plan and how they're going to execute the plan.
I think that's very fair. Listen, starting up front, you mentioned John Feliciano, huge bounce back game. You talked to him earlier this week. He sprung Zach Moss and Devin Singletary on their touchdown runs, or, one of each of their touchdown runs. I know Moss ended up with 2. So really nice game there. Deion Dawkins wasn't at his best today, but was significantly better than he was 1 week ago. Mitch Morse, Cody Ford, both had solid games. I know Ford was penalized this week, but I thought he was pretty good. And then Darrell Williams, there's an issue there. There's something going on there where he's been beat 2 consecutive weeks now. Not looking like the same guy that did so well 1 year ago, but it's still early. You got to kind of wait and see what happens there. But Josh himself, Josh is missing some throws that last year he was making. He had Stephon Diggs down the field and he underthrew the ball and it was almost intercepted. Had he led him a little bit more, it could have gone for 6. The interception that he threw was behind Stephon Diggs and it allowed Xavier Howard to make a play on the ball. Just some, overthrowing some players. I remember one play with Devin Singletary running along the sidelines and he just overshot the target. So his accuracy is a little bit off right now through 2 weeks. He's still trying to maybe figure out how much area he's supposed to put on balls. Maybe he's putting too much on some, not enough on others. It's something that will come with time. He's gone against 2 really good defenses, both teams that had good secondaries. So that's something that factors into it. Let's wait a quarter of the season, maybe 5 or 6 games, see where the Bills are at, see where Allen's at. But yes, it's okay to sit here and say he's not playing his best ball because he's not. He completed just over 51% of his passes in this game, but the Bills still found a way to win. They still found a way to score 3 touchdowns in the second half of this game. Never gave Miami a chance to kind of get back into it. Now, mind you, a lot of that has to do with the defense as well, but the Bills sustained drives when they mattered late in these games, whether it was with Josh or with this running back duo out of the backfield.
The Bills were 4 for 4 in the red zone, 4 for 4 goal to go, 1 for 1 on 4th down, and 7 for 13 on 3rd down in this game. 21 first downs to only 13 for the Dolphins. And it was the rushing attack, 10 first down rushing attempts in this game. I mean, those are some building blocks when you feel like when you're talking about an offense that hasn't really hit its stride yet, and there's not a confidence level, whether it be with the game plan or what plays are going to work. That's another thing. Stephon Diggs said this week about getting back in the lab and working harder. And I think one of the first things that you think about is like your individual training, your individual work, but it's also about getting in the lab with your teammates and figuring out, listen, football is a complicated game with 11 players in the field. How many times have we seen like the Patriots come out during the Tom Brady era when it wasn't really good right away? And it took some time to develop some of that chemistry, even for a guy like Gronkowski or Edelman, who Brady was with for years. I went back and looked at the Tampa Bay Bucs start from last year. And this was a team that I think pretty consistently had a good defense. Like, I think the Bills have the beginning stages. Well, I don't want to jinx them, I guess, for fans' purposes, but they have a defense that now, if they're going to bring this kind of pressure and affect opposing teams' quarterbacks, turn the ball over like this, the talent that we know that they have in that back seven, that could all of a sudden be a dynamic top tier defense in this league. If you have that and you can figure it out on offense and become a top 10 offense, which I still think that this team has the horses to do, it's just about getting back to basics, adjusting to the adjustments. And I think things only kind of get easier, Ryan. Next week, it's Washington. I think Houston is going to have their come to Jesus moment. I know that they've had a really great start to the season. I didn't see how today's game ended, but I know that they were really doing well for a while. I think that that's going to be a really tough environment for them to play in week 4. And then it's, week 5. And then you're talking about the games that the bugaboo for the Bills last year. And I think that will be the true test. By then you'll have more than a month in, more than a month's worth of games to get right, and we'll kind of see where this offense is. I'm really eyeing that Brian Daboll versus Steve Spagnuolo matchup when we get to see it. I believe it's in week 6. That's going to tell us a lot about what this offense can be, because that's the team and that's the style of defense that they're going to have to beat to get to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, you raised several great points there. Just real quick on the Texans, Tyrod Taylor was injured at one point, so then they had to go to Davis Mills, and then things got really ugly for him. But they look more competitive than it definitely I expected to through 2 games so far with their starting offense. But yeah, this is still a figuring it out type process. And listen, you mentioned it, Matt. The Bills ran the ball 10 times on first down. They leaned on the run today. Now, when Washington goes to the tape, when the Texans go to the tape, Kansas City, Tennessee, all these teams that are up on the horizon, they're going to say, okay, the Bills are leaning a little bit more on the run than they did 1 year ago. That's going to help the run game to a certain extent because there might still be some skepticism, but it's going to really help the passing game from the play action pass perspective. That is where Josh Allen really thrived last year. But I think at a certain point in time later in the year, teams are like, okay, well, they're running the play action, but they never hand it off. Well, if you run the ball this much and you're somewhat effective with it, that's when the play action becomes really dangerous. So the blocking obviously has to get a little bit better when you do play action because that takes some additional time to get the play in motion. But there's little things here that you can build on. The success of Devin Singletary in back-to-back weeks, the way that Zach Moss bounced back after fumbling the ball early in the game, failing to convert a 3rd and 1, and to what he did later in that game. So there's little things there. And when you get the run game going, it opens things up for Josh and these weapons in the passing game. You still haven't seen them use Isaiah McKenzie much, probably because of the whole shoulder issue. He's out there, but he's not being used in motion, getting those jet sweeps a lot. So a lot of little wrinkles they haven't even thrown in yet, and that's going to happen once they start getting into a groove. So give this offense time. The defense has done their job for 2 weeks, keeping the Bills in both games, but I think the offense ultimately will catch up.
Charles G asks, do you think Josh is capable of putting the team on his back like he did last year? Does he need more help from the defense, running game, etc.? I mean, it kind of comes down to, a couple things. Number one, defenses too, Ryan, like we're much more prepared for week 1 this year. Like I think that we're seeing that with just the Bills' ability to play defense early on in the season, the continuity there, how seamlessly they're playing, the communication level where it's at, guys playing together, guys getting to the ball, the physicality. I've been really impressed with just the defensive play across the board that I've watched the first 2 weeks of football. So I think that there's going to be an adjustment period to that. And I do think, sugar high Josh, it's a real thing. It's a thing for a reason. And I think it's something that he's got to, try to figure out. And that's something that we're going to chronicle as the year goes on. And, he's going to have plenty of big moments to figure it out. I still go back to some of those games though, last year when, he had some of his best performances. I mean, that Denver game to me against the Vic Fangio defense was significant. That was something that stood out to me. His performance against the Colts, if you really go back in the playoff game, they put up 27 on the Colts. He threw for over 300 yards. I mean, that was a game against the defense that was flying around, that was playing really good tight man coverage, making things hard on the receivers. It was almost like the beginning stages of what we've seen teams start to do to this offense. And so I think it comes down to also, we spent so much time talking about the tight end position in the offseason. I think Dawson Knox might be turning a corner quietly here, Ryan. Big touchdown catch today. It was a hard one. He was really reliable last week with the 4 catches. Everything so far has come up aces when Dawson Knox has been targeting his offense. Maybe that's an area where teams might not be expecting you to feature a guy like Dawson Knox, where Josh Allen can start to get easy completions on early downs, set themselves up to kind of sustain drives. Because that's one of the big things that they did so well last year was they sustained drives. And they got to do that more consistently, especially next week against a tough Washington front.
Yeah, Dawson Knox, believe it or not, has been Mr. Reliable for this team. He's been hauling in most of his targets. That was one of Josh's better throws. That touchdown pass was a shorter throw, but the placement on it, how he threw it, where only Knox could really get it. Knox still made a nice catch play on it as well. And there was one play where Knox did not haul in his target, but that was more of an errant throw by Josh Allen. He threw it off his back foot, kind of falling away, and Knox had to play defense on it. And he even did a good job there by not allowing the member of the Dolphins secondary to come down with it. I can't remember if it was Byron Jones or who it was at that point in time, but he kind of got up there and kind of tipped the ball away from him. So even when there haven't been good passes, he's had the wherewithal to make sure that the defense couldn't come away with it. So Knox has been really good. You mentioned it. This offseason is night and day compared to last year's. remember, everything was done over Zoom 1 year ago. You weren't on the practice field much. You had camp. You kind of got thrown into it. So offenses were ahead of defenses. There was a lack of cohesiveness. And now you have a typical offseason. Everyone's getting the film, the tape. They're looking at what the Bills did 1 year ago. So the defenses are coming out hot. They're coming out and playing good football and kind of matching up with the Bills. Even the Dolphins. I know it sounds funny saying the Dolphins played well because they lost 35-0, but I thought their coverage for much of the game was solid in terms of their coverage overall. They had there was a play to Emmanuel Sanders in the end zone where they closed the gap on that play and broke it up. There was the play, like I mentioned, it was underthrown, but the cornerbacks made several plays along the sidelines, batting things away, knocking balls away. So the coverage has been there more than it was 1 year ago. This offense, give it time, give it some patience, but the defense itself in Buffalo is looking like one of those units that can carry it. But going back to the question that was asked to us, Matt, I don't think any one player can carry a team on its back for an entire season. Look at a Patrick Mahomes. He's, obviously the big reason why the Chiefs have been so successful over the last few years. But look what happened to him in the Super Bowl when the line broke down, when the defense got to him. Even a guy like Mahomes, who's been in the back-to-back Super Bowls, had no answers in that game. So Josh Allen needs help from the defense. He needs some help from the run game, from his receivers. I'm just not sure in today's NFL one player can kind of carry the load all the way through the regular season and playoffs.
One thing I saw in the comments was about, I think it was over on Twitter, about the design, the script coming out of halftime. One of the things that I tweeted about at the end of the half, as the Bills offense was really just stuck in mud. And I said, this is going to be interesting to see what they learned from this first half and the game script that Brian Daboll can put together to come out at halftime. And, this is something that I think going back to last season, Brian Daboll's done a really good job on. I mean, a lot of people piling on him early on the season. I think you got to point out some credit for the way that he dialed things up, got the ball out of Josh Allen's hands quickly, was able to kind of get some receivers open in space. I thought that ball to Cole Beasley, those 22 yarders to a small guy like Cole Beasley over the middle, they're just backbreakers for a defense. I mean, you saw the Miami defense wilt in that moment. He goes to Sanders for the 13-yard incompletion, then almost a calamity in Devin Singletary fumbling that ball, incompletion on the next play, Singletary rush, and then on a 3rd and 6, Josh Allen goes to Stephon Diggs for a very underrated 7-yard gain to pick up a first down. Those are big plays that we don't focus too much on after the fact, but that sets up on the very next play, the 8-yard touchdown pass to Dawson Knox. So I think that at the very least, the good news here, listen, you're not going to play many games with an offense as inept as the Miami Dolphins were today, right? This offense stinks. Like, they got some players. I know Will Fuller's out, and you hope for the best for him. I know he's dealing with some personal issues, whatever that is. They got Devontae Parker. They got Jalen Waddle, who I think is, I might have been wrong on him. I think he could be a real dynamic player. He's got to be. Did he have a drop or two today? Was that Waddle at all?
He had one that was thrown toward the sideline. It was a little behind him. He should have hauled that in. He obviously had the muff punt as well. But yeah, he definitely looked a part of a playmaker for them today in terms of looking at that overall receiving core and the corps there at wide receiver and tight end. Obviously, Gesicki's had success with the Bills in his career at times, Devontae Parker. But I thought today Waddle was definitely the big winner.
Yeah, and I just think that their offense, whether it's Brissett, whether it's Tua, and first of all, oh man, I think Tua may not be it. And I think this was something that we were talking about going into the season. He was able to kind of keep his head above water, but when I watch him play, I just feel like I'm watching somebody that doesn't know how to swim just drown in a pool when they goes up against a really good defense. It's what we saw in week 17 last year, and nothing about those first 3 series were any better today. And obviously you hate to see him go down, and you wonder what the extent of the rib injuries are, and what kind of time will tell. But I thought that this offense, listen, they're not going to play many offenses that are this bad. So you go into a future game with your offense struggling a little bit like that, how that game goes, anybody's to guess. I mean, Patrick Mahomes could hang 30 points on this defense. He's done it before. But I think that the way that they won today is something that they can build upon. And I want to get into a couple things. We're going to bring in Sarah Holland now to the show. She's got a couple things. She's been in the chat. How are you, Miss Sarah? How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We are wonderful, covering a football game. Not too many things better to do with a Sunday afternoon. All right, what do you got for us?
So I just saw that Zach Moss actually put on Twitter that unfortunately his aunt passed away and he had to help bury her just a day before this game. And he had mentioned that, he had fumbled the ball and then he turned his game around and helped win the game with 2 touchdowns. And he had mentioned in the tweet also that he said something like, life is all about the ups and downs and it matters how you respond to those challenges. I think sort of alluding to game one against the Pittsburgh Steelers. What do you guys think about Zach Moss in today's game?
Matt, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So it kind of caught me off guard. I kind of stumbled through my question a little bit because, nobody knew anything about that. And so when he started his press conference today and he kind of let everybody in on what he's been dealing with, it was jarring. And, you could see the emotion on his face a little bit, and to play under those circumstances. I mean, we've seen great games, performances in the NFL. I mean, when Brett Favre lost his dad and, played on Monday Night Football, and, you rally around people that are going through those kinds of personal things. And you could see it really on Zach's face today. So he, it was a 24-hour thing. Like, not only is he dealing last week with, being inactive week one, he comes back week two and, really goes through something. He was at the ceremony yesterday, so he was able to kind of spend some time with some family before turning his attention to the game. And he kind of embraced the game. He said, when you're dealing with stuff like that, you want to get away. You want to, something that's going to kind of take your mind off of things. And he went out here today and he wanted to make some plays. And the first time he touched the ball, I think it was the first time he touched the ball, if not one of the first few, big time fumble. And that's put him in the doghouse in the past, Ryan, those kinds of plays. And he said, he turned to Deion Dawkins on the sideline and he said, next time I go in there, I'm making an impactful play. Get me the ball. I'm making an impactful play. And I thought that touchdown run today was maybe the start of something for Zach Moss, because that was, to me, the most inspiring run I've seen that him really deliver a blow to a would-be tackler. Some of that physicality that was advertised when they drafted him, gets in, scores the touchdown. And he said he really pushed hard for it because he knew that on the next play they'd probably go back to a pass and he'd have to go back to blocking instead of trying to score a touchdown. So had some fun with it there, but unbelievable performance to kind of go through a setback, respond to it for Zach Moss. And I think it's important as he tries to, keep pace with Singletary in this backfield, considering Devin had a huge game today. Obviously he had a fumble. They didn't lose it, but he did fumble. Big 46-yard opening game.
Yeah, listen, both backs performed well. Both fumbled the ball once. Singletary had 2 fumbles last week as well. So keeping possession of the ball is going to be something to keep an eye on going forward, because you mentioned it, Matt. We've seen in the past where fumbles will get a guy off the field for a while. Last year against the 49ers, Moss fumbles coming out of the end zone. I think he's out for 2 quarters after that, and he comes back in the third quarter. Fumbles early in this game. I think he had 1 carry for a short gain, then he catches the ball and fumbles. His next opportunity is a 3rd and short, and he fails to convert it. So it's like, oh boy, back-to-back opportunities where he's kind of failed in those things. But he bounced back. He bounced back from being inactive 1 week ago, and when he's on the field, he scores 2 touchdowns. First one, John Feliciano springs him out there a little bit, and he does enough to get in the end zone. You mentioned the second touchdown where he took that hit in the hole, and he kind of bounced back a little bit, kept his feet moving, though, and next thing you know, he got over the goal line. So 2 touchdowns scored by Moss, keeping pace with Singletary in terms of showing what he can do, showing that he's an asset to this team. And as the Bills get more and more guys back and healthy, especially when they feel confident about Isaiah McKenzie's shoulder, it's probably going to be Matt Breida that might be the odd man out on a week-by-week basis. If Moss keeps performing like this, if Singletary keeps performing well, there might not be enough room to have all of those backs active. And right now, Moss has shown that, hey, you need me out here. I can kind of punch it in those tougher situations.
All right, Sarah, what was you had something else? You put out a story right before we went live.
Yes, I did. It was actually an interesting stat about Jacoby Brissett. The last time the Bills shut out a team was actually in 2016 against the Patriots. And they were actually led by Jacoby Brissett at the time because Tom Brady was actually suspended. And we know when Jacoby came in for Tua, he obviously started off a little bit. It was a brutal start for him, to say the least. His first 3 series, ended with a 3-and-out, and then the interception by Levi Wallace, and then a fumble. So I just wanted to ask you guys, your opinions on the play of Jacoby after he came in after Tua.
Yeah. So, when it came to Brissett, I know he didn't put up any points. I thought after a rough start, he did start to manage the offense pretty decently. I think he looked better than that short stint from what we saw from Tua. Now, mind you, again, they didn't put up any points, but there were some brutal drops by those receivers. There were some fumbles that Brissett had them deep down in Bill's territory, and they just couldn't convert. So I thought he performed pretty well. It is kind of ironic, though, that Buffalo's last 2 shutouts have come with Brissett playing the majority of the snaps at quarterback. So that obviously doesn't bode well for him. But the Dolphins aren't in a place right now where they're going to go away from Tua. It's his second year. They invested a high draft pick in him. And even with all the reports of their interest in Deshaun Watson, they're not going to go to Jacoby Brissett right now. But whenever Tua is healthy and he's back, if those struggles continue late into the year, it will be interesting to see what they do in terms of maybe giving Brissett an opportunity to play late in the year, whether they really have to go back to the drawing board in terms of drafting or signing a quarterback at free agency. I just think that Brissett at the end of the day, although putting up no points, I thought he did manage a few drives pretty well for this Miami Dolphins team.
They up front, the Dolphins were overwhelmed with the Bills, and I think that they kind of knew that going in. I can't remember who tweeted it out. I think Marcel Louis-Jacques had a quote, and you can go check his Twitter handle. He obviously was gracious enough to join us this week on our show to preview this game, and he was talking to I think I have it up here. Let me see. I want to bring it up because it was Christian Wilkins said he thought the Dolphins pass rush did a good job pressuring Josh Allen, but they can always do better. That wasn't it. It was a good quote. I wanted to bring it to the people, but I cannot find it. Trying to do it here on the fly. But I thought Jacoby Brissett came in and did everything that he could behind a really kind of discouraging offensive line. I think if you're Miami, you have problems up front, which is, you got an immobile quarterback into a kind of a slow processor. You got problems at quarterback, but you got problems up front as well. So I think Jacoby Brissett is going to deal with a lot of those same issues. I think he has a lot of the same limitations that Tua has. But one guy in particular that I want to talk about, Ryan, before we get out of here is Star Lotulelei, because so much has been made about him. He hasn't played a real NFL football game, regular season football game, in over what will it have been? Maybe 20 months by the time he ended up walking out there and playing today. He got 12 snaps in the preseason finale, injured the calf, played today, and I thought that just his presence alone was enough. I saw one play where he almost had a sack. I thought he was held on the play. I tweeted it. There was one play, I think Marcel tweeted the picture, where it took 3 guys to block him. I mean, he is going to be, I think, that missing ingredient to what really unlocks this front. I mean, he's not Vita Vea. Nobody's Vita Vea. But if you can have the poor man's version, even if it's a really poor man's version, you saw what that could mean today.
Yeah, listen, Lotulelei was obviously in great shape this offseason. You saw a lot of videos of him. He looked like he was moving really well, and I thought he moved really well in this game. Earlier in the drive where you thought he was held on one of the plays, he did actually draw a holding penalty. I want to say it was Robert Hunt that was called for it or flagged for it, but Lotulelei was kind of closing the gaps. He was really solid against the run. He had some pressures on Brissett. I thought he looked really good for his first action in over 20 months. And listen, last year that was supposedly the big reason why they struggled in run support. They were missing Lotulelei. They didn't have him in the opener, and the Bills did a nice job shutting down Najee Harris. But today, same thing. They looked great shutting down Myles Gaskin and company. So the run defense looks really good. And this had been a weakness of this defense over the last few years. So if they can get that under control, the secondary and the linebackers can play the way that they have, and this pass rush gets going, this can be a defense that can shut down both the run and the pass. And Lotulelei does factor into that. Even if he doesn't show up a lot on the stat sheet, like we've mentioned, some players, they just don't. But they make impact plays in other ways. That's what he did today.
All right, so If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. We're at almost an hour. We're going to go around the horn real quick. Final takeaways from everybody. We'll start with Sarah in a minute, but hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well. We want to make sure that you guys know when we're going live. All right, your big takeaway, Sarah, from today's game.
My big takeaway from today's game, I think, is just that the defense played outstanding. I think they're slowly becoming a top defense in this league. And I really can't wait to see sort of what we see from them in the coming weeks, and especially against Washington.
Yeah, big takeaway here. The young pass rushers really shine in week 2. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do against Washington, what they can do against Houston these next few weeks, because these guys are the future of the Buffalo Bills. Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, both in contract years, both over the age of 30. It's going to be the AJ Epinesa and the Greg Rousseau show sooner rather than later. And today was a promising start of good things that could come.
I hope everybody was paying attention to my preseason training camp stock reports, because I told you to buy all the Devin Singletary stock you could get, and I hope you got in while you could in all of your keeper leagues. I did 3 or 4 fantasy podcasts, and people kept asking me, what are you thinking? Who's going to get the lion's share of the carries? Now, today was an example that there's going to be times when both of these players can get off, but I think the consistency that we've seen now through the preseason and now the 2 games in the regular season, Devin Singletary looks like he's more than comfortable in the Buffalo backfield. Are you hosting a large party next weekend when the Bills host the Washington football team? Check out Tops' huge selection of party platters for a delicious, effortless, and affordable, no-stress way to impress. For complete details, stop by their carry-out cafe or visit topsmarkets.com/fantasy. Football, we're out of here. We're under an hour. We got it done. From Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens, Florida, I am Matt Parrino. She is Sarah Holland. He is Ryan Talbot. We will see you this week. 2 shows on tap. Don't miss them.